Welcome to Verify This, a podcast brought to you by Candatis. We deliver bespoke identity and access management solutions leveraging the Microsoft Entra product family. Our solutions are designed to simplify onboarding, enhance security, and boost business efficiency for clients globally. Throughout the series, we'll connect with leading experts across the industry to bring you insight on all things digital identity. Hear about trending issues, lessons learned, and priorities for the future within identity verification and authentication.
Like travel providers, who have a lot to gain from decentralized identity systems, and also they're quite crucial to the realization of the full potential of this technology.
It's built on this idea, this principle of privacy by design, which would make complying to these changes in legislations so much simpler for all these businesses.
Welcome to our latest episode of Verify This. I'm your host, Lucy McNeil, Product Marketing Lead at Candatis. And today we have the pleasure of being joined by Saarah Shah, Product Manager, and Naser Mutawi, Associate Program Director from Publicis Sapient. Saarah has worked across a range of industries with strong concentrations on decentralized identities and has a passion for challenging the current traditional identity systems. Naser has 16 years experience leading teams on state-of-the-art projects, playing a key role in business transformation programs. Welcome both.
Thank you so much for having us on. So I'm Saarah. I'm a product manager at Publicis Sapient, like you've mentioned. So I specialize in emerging technology and in particular decentralized identity. So I'm currently working in the travel and hospitality space. And in my current project, I'm leading the product capability alongside Candatis' own Will Fletcher. So we're building a production-grade implementation of a decentralized identity solution for a destination experience, which is very exciting, with a vision to bring and create a seamless and streamlined visitor experience. So I work alongside Naser, who is a program lead.
Hi, I'm Naser. Thanks, Lucy and Candatis, for having us. So my role as the program lead is basically to partner with clients, understand their challenges and their ambitions, and essentially become an extension to their organization. And to lead our team of SPEED, right? So SPEED is an acronym in Sapient, which stands for Strategy, Product, Experience, Engineering, and Data and Artificial Intelligence, which is where I collaborate basically with all of these crafts to make a vision into a reality. So there's definitely not a dull day in my job. In general, with digital business transformation initiatives, we work to bring organizations to become digital centric. And I've worked across different industries, but in the last few years, I've been more focused and very interested in the travel and hospitality. So I'm based in the UAE, and in this region, there's a lot of ambition around becoming leading in technology, and for travel and hospitality to give out unparalleled experiences for visitors and residents alike, because it's very expat heavy. So for the service industry to be streamlined and efficient as well. Data in a broad sense is at the heart of all of this. And that's where decentralized identity is a natural step here. And that's also where it's been really great to work with a lovely Candatis team. So yeah, that's myself.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And yes, the team loves working with you both as well. And you mentioned decentralized technology there, Naser. I mean, your work clearly has a strong focus on that, and it's a topic that is kind of the crux of Verify This. I unpacked with Will in episode 3 what verifiable credentials are. And we kind of only briefly touched on decentralized technology. And then on the other hand, I spoke with Harry about how organizations are utilizing data for the greater good in terms of loyalty and experience. Well, what does decentralized identity and challenging traditional identity systems mean to you? What makes it different? How can we use it?
So for me, challenging traditional identity systems is about acknowledging that there's a need for change. So the current state of the identity industry is characterized by inefficiencies, challenges such as fragmentation, loss of privacy, friction in transactions, and also a lack of personalization. So this is because at the moment what we have is an account-based identity model. So when I'm traveling, I have a different account with each of those service providers, whether that's airline, transport, hotel, events. I have a separate identity with each of these travel providers. And with that comes this idea of like siloed profiles. So the travel provider owns that data. So for instance, if I'm booking a holiday and I've created an account with an airline, with a hotel, with a scuba diving place that I'm going to, all of these travel providers own that data on me, and it doesn't flow with me as I go throughout my journey. So what does this traditional identity system actually mean for service providers and visitors? So we can look at it through both of those persona lenses. So for visitors, from the user's point of view, they have to sign up to multiple apps and websites. This means disparate ticket management, and it also means a difficulty in sharing that data. So say, for instance, I've already shared with one service provider I have an allergy. I then have to go and repeat that information across multiple junctures of my journey. So we'll focus on this a bit later on. So to sum it up from the visitor side, there's a need to remember multiple passwords, handle multiple bookings, re-enter personal information and payment information multiple times throughout that journey. And then from the service provider standpoint, by not having this singular immutable identity across providers, it opens the door wide to travel intermediaries to come in and try to provide that service, which brings together an otherwise fragmented travel experience. So the data sharing here is in silos. It can't happen because there's no legally permissioned B2B data exchange, which happens here. And the problem with the data being held by service providers is they have to insure against it at their own cost and have to make sure they're keeping up with GDPR regulations and things like that. So there's a lot of problems with this kind of data framework and data sharing. And then, of course, that data, it might be incomplete, it might be outdated. And it's also difficult to personalize with the data, which isn't always of high quality. So in my opinion, when you ask what is challenging traditional identity, the ideal world for me is a world with digital identity, which creates an ecosystem of trusted entities.
Yeah, I mean, for me, in terms of the question of like what makes it different, and how do we look at it today, I like to look at it from the lens of, data management today, and in this day and age has been largely modeled around the traditional ways of managing credentials, right? So in the last, few decades or century, there's been things like physical printouts, stamped documents, ID cards, and driving licenses, and so on. Usually these things from both the verifying and issuing entities, they are stored in some kind of, it's in a drawer somewhere, or let's say after the computers and the internet were introduced, they're stored in some kind of database, right? So inevitably it becomes outside of the user's control. So where does that bring us? What's the impact today from decentralized, right? The advancement of blockchain technology, or let's say cryptography and trust frameworks, it completely flips the model to make it in control of the user, and not stored in some various, centralized silos. This control and security, in combination with the convenience aspect, like having easily accessible, controlled, shareable, credentials and preferences from a digital wallet, it completely changes the traditional paradigm. And not only that, but it introduces big opportunities now for, let's say, the travel and hospitality sector, but among other sectors as well. So let's say with abilities like zero knowledge proofs, where the user can verify their identity without revealing sensitive information, or with selective disclosure, where users can share only specific pieces of information required for a particular transaction. Privacy and data control is taking on new heights. And now the traveler journey can go through a major transformation today to enhance the user experience, and it streamlines the service provider operations as well. So, for example, as Sarah was saying, about the shift from the account-based identity model, with this new identity paradigm, travelers can now use verifiable credentials to seamlessly check into hotels, board flights, access loyalty programs, all of this without repeatedly having to share this sensitive information. Um, and I'd like to add also a bit of a regional context, right? So I've been living in the UAE now for 10 years. And there's been an introduction in recent years of something called the UAE Pass, right? Which is this is the National Digital Identity Platform, and it's made a lot of difference in terms of official and governmental processes and services. It's made them significantly easier. These services are largely periodic as well, right? Like you might have to do some renewals and things like that every, quarter, 6 months, 1 year. Um, but with the travel and hospitality experiences, the potential for decentralized identity and the frequency of usage is much higher, right? Because it's used on a day-to-day basis, and it's used across different parts of a visitor journey, right? From preparing to travel to the actual travel and going through passport border control, through actually ground transport, immersion into the actual destination they're in, and even after they leave the destination. So the opportunities for transformation are just very significant. Um, it's worth just adding one last thing, which is that not only is it a place where in this region that they're trying to make the destinations here world class for visitors, but even they have ambitions of becoming one of the best places to live on the planet, right, in the coming 10 and 20 years. So whether it's for people who are traveling in or for people based locally and as expats, which is, I mean, the UAE is largely made out of expats, but even the other GCC countries and the GCC locals as well who are visiting from those countries, there's a significant base of customers in the tourism sector comprising of these expats. So the frequency is high and the opportunity is very high.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see more and more of it popping up. These digital identities and destinations, EIDAS. I think they're doing a solution in India. Homeland Security are looking at it. So I think it's kind of, we're at a tipping point, I think. And both of you are obviously well versed when it comes to user experience. You've got experience in journey mapping. So it would be really great to get your take on how important that is when we're thinking about data sharing in the decentralized ecosystem world and how we use that data in the best way. Because there's a lot of factors at play, a lot of variables. It's an example where the customer and the user and or the tourist is really the ultimate priority and the focus. So let me hear about that. That would be great.
No, definitely, Lucy. That's a really interesting question. So I'll leave to Naser to explore the journey and user experience side of things. That's more his forte. But I just want to set a bit more context when we're talking about data sharing. Just to give an overview of the different types of data within the ecosystem before we discuss how users interact with that. So there's two different types of data that we're dealing with in our project. So there's verifiable credentials, and there's also preferences which are stored in the personal data store, which we'll do a bit more of a deep dive into later. But first, let's go through verifiable credentials. So this is something you've covered extensively in the previous podcast with Will, which I've listened to, and it was great. So credentials here credentials offer high trust data, right? So this is data which doesn't change and requires hard verification. So think of passports, visas, driver's license, even tickets to a concert or booking confirmation. But not all data is high trust. So imagine, for instance, bringing it back to the dietary preferences example that I was mentioning. What you like to do on the weekend, or just your likes and dislikes when you go on holiday, what you like to eat. This is low trust, continuous, and doesn't require hard verification. If it was stored as a credential, you'd have to self-issue these to yourself in this ecosystem. And then for any changes, you'd have to delete, reissue, discard. It just doesn't make sense for data that you don't need to verify, right? So in the ecosystem which we're working on, we're storing self-attested preferences in a personal data store as decentralized web nodes. So the question is, what is a personal data store? So it's data which is owned by the user. So it allows you to store all kinds of data about yourself and edit it. But it's not just storage. It also layers capabilities on top of that as well, which facilitates a network of sharing. So instead of service providers having and owning all that data on the visitor, or on the consumer in their own central store, which is siloed, like what I mentioned about the account-based identity model, the visitor owns it instead. And then you can kind of grant access to any service provider of your choosing. So, for example, if in my personal data store I have certain hotel preferences, and say I usually go to Marriott, but this time I go to Hilton, in the traditional model, because my preferences are stored with Marriott in an account-based model, I can't share those preferences with Hilton easily, right? My entire identity and preferences are kind of stuck with Marriott. But instead, with a personal data store and this new way of sharing information, I instead control all of those preferences and share them on demand with any service provider in my journey. So the data travels with me as I'm going through the journey in this decentralized model. To give another example as well, in the case of education and job preferences, say, for example, I make an account on LinkedIn, I self-attest my education and my job requirements.
Yeah, and like something to add here is that user centricity is really vital in everything, right? And it's especially so with decentralized identity, where users' expectations today have evolved, continue to evolve, and so we need to always be mindful of it and not catching up to it, but on top of it. We live in a world where attention span is quite short, and you need results very quickly. So usability and simplicity is really key here. The process of managing and sharing identity credentials should be really straightforward. Uh, People should be given intuitive interfaces to do things like granular consent, perform selective disclosure, and manage data revocation in a way without it being, too confusing. Um, we have to be also very clear in the communication about how that data is being used, how is it being shared, and of course ensuring that it's being protected. So we want to not overwhelm the user. So with we do things like journey mapping exercises where we can identify some touch points where this information can be conveyed effectively and to the context of where the user is in their journey. And also through our research and user testing, we get to understand, what are the friction points or what are the concerns that people have in different junctures in their travel journey. So with this exercise of, journey mapping and persona identification and different needs, we get to identify the opportunities to leverage decentralized identity capabilities to remove these frictions and to make their journeys more seamless. We do the same exercise for service operators as well in this mapping exercise so that our approach is more holistic and our solutions help both parties in the equation, right? From the user side and the travel operator side.
Yeah, wow, yeah. I mean, almost every conversation I've had around this topic, and this type of technology leads to the question around why organizations would want to take this approach. The perspective always seems to be there's no issue with how we currently operate. Why should we invest our time, money, and effort in shifting that? There seems to be a reluctance there.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that why there's usually a reluctance, right? Because big changes are definitely scary for organizations, especially when they perceive the status quo to be adequate. So, basically, if it's not broken, then why fix it? But that's actually the part that I would take issue with, right? Is that it's not adequate today. It's just that this is just considered the norm based on old models that we have built and advanced things on top of. And that, sure enough, that advancements have happened over time and it's improved things. But still, everything is being built on top of an old model, right? And that's where there are certainly problems that still need solving. So, for example, data breaches and identity theft are significant issues. And with the traditional centralized systems, storing vast amounts of personal data in a single location makes these systems very attractive for target for hackers. So the distributed nature of decentralized identity significantly reduces the risk of such breaches.
Yeah, and just to follow up on Nasser's point, this shift in the current paradigm, a lot of businesses do not even know that they have an identity problem, right? This is one of Gillian's quotes that she uses often, and it's identifying that and then using identifying what their pain points are, and then introducing the idea of what can decentralized identity bring as a solution. Because companies at the moment, they have pain points in data privacy, in data sharing, and frictions in customer interactions. But there's always this blind spot because they don't attribute these to this broken identity model. And so for a lot of reasons, they should shift their current data and identity strategies to SSI. So a couple of these reasons, which we'll kind of deep dive into, is low quality data, the cost of securing that data, repetitive data, but also like societal and legal pressures as well. So firstly, I'll touch a bit on the low quality data and the repetitive data element of this. So the quality of data with service providers in the whole hotel and tourism industry, it's bad quality. It's often incomplete, outdated, and it's not used optimally either. But how is this currently collected? So there's a few key terms here that I kind of want to go through. So there's third-party data, first-party data, and zero-party data. And the crux of the question is, how can we make data as high quality as possible? And why is it the case that it's not today? So let's examine third-party data first. So this kind of data is collected by companies and then shared to anyone who wants to purchase it, right? So we have customer data platforms, and what they do, they try to create a 360 view of the customer. So they group everyone into these huge clusters, and it can be based on websites you visit, browsing, purchase history, and this is all kind of aggregated and kind of try to build up a profile based on these inferences. So for example, if I visit a lot of travel websites, it might put me in a bucket called frequent traveler. But this personalization is limited to how many clusters you can create. And as you can see, like when you break it down like this, it's not true personalization. It's based on these clusters rather than who I am as a person and all these other preferences that I might have. And also a problem with third-party data is you can't really verify or guarantee the accuracy of it either. And then on top of that, you're also storing data you may never use, because with third-party data, you're kind of casting out this huge net and you're just kind of collating whatever you can to try to build up this kind of Frankenstein image of what this visitor, what this persona looks like. So then we move to first-party data. So this is data that is directly collected during processes such as booking or purchasing. So this is higher quality because it's data that's unique to the individual. But there's problems with this as well. There's inefficiencies of how companies currently use this, which would be solved with SSI and having a PDS. So any big company, likely throughout their history, have acquired a lot of other companies, right? And this makes it really hard in terms of understanding their spread of data across organizations. A lot of companies have data that they don't know that they have, because it's kind of spread across all these legacy systems, and maybe they've tried to centralize it into a single product stack, but this is very hard to do, and they'll never be able to use all this data efficiently. So having a personal data store would offload a lot of risks and costs involved with this. So when it comes to data sharing, having a decentralized identity system and a personal data store, you share data on demand, rather than service providers storing them. So this is about data minimization. So where organizations
Yeah, a lot of really, really good points, Sarah. Uh, one really important thing also, like organizations today, like they need to recognize and act on the growing importance and adoption of things like GDPR compliance, right? Or let's say equivalent regulations. I certainly see a lot of attention around this here, in the UAE and in KSA. Destinations here and travel providers are really trying to, of course, they're keen to be compliant and establish trust with their users. But at the same time, they also need to delight visitors and give them novel experiences and encourage repeat visits, right? In other words, loyalty. Decentralized identity systems enable organizations to comply more easily with these regulations by providing features such as granular consent and data revocation. So this not only avoids potential pitfalls like fines and things like that, but it also builds trust and gives a good experience to customers who are becoming more aware and more caring about data privacy issues. So, the reasons to, let's say, get with the program are getting quite compelling. It's just that it's an emerging space and it hasn't evolved to a mainstream level yet. But Saarah and I are definitely on a mission with our team members to explore and demonstrate these opportunities and benefits to our clients and all the parties connected to their ecosystems, like travel providers, who have a lot to gain from decentralized identity systems. And also, they're quite crucial to the realization of the full potential of this technology. So it's a natural step for organizations to step into this territory of decentralized identity if they want to be seen and get their brand to become forward-looking and customer-focused in the market.
Awesome. And there's one more thing I wanted to say in answer to your question. So why organizations should care, right? But the main thing here is, as Nas was saying, the reason for adopting this is compelling, but we also have to reduce some friction as well and make it easier for companies to adopt this new identity and data exchange framework. So reducing the amount of change they go through as a company by, for example, still letting them use traditional databases and providing them with just integrations to enable participation in this ecosystem. And just to elaborate on some of the social and legal pressures that are occurring here. So just to mention some of the legislation, we're seeing in the EU a lot of legislation which is mandating data sharing APIs for big companies to share their data with another service provider of the consumer's choice. So a really interesting one here is the European Digital Markets Act. So companies have to pipe data to storage places of any consumer's choice, right? So this movement towards giving customers more control and creating a more competitive landscape is emerging within Europe, and it's kind of encouraging the building of this ecosystem, which natively enables these businesses to be on the front foot when these kind of changes happen in the wider political landscape, especially when it comes to things such as data privacy, as Naser mentioned. By having an SSI ecosystem that they're already onboarded onto, it kind of is built on this idea, this principle of privacy by design, which would make complying to these changes and legislations so much simpler for all these businesses.
Yeah, I mean, to your points, all your points are so valid. And Gillian always says that, when she's talking about this as a concept, that instead of spending all this money trying to protect all this data, actually invest that in something innovative and then actually use the data and use it to delight and use it to, change the experience. Speaking of, datas and customers, how do you think risk perception plays into this way of operating? So, we've spoken on potentially the reluctance from organizations, or even the users themselves, the idea of personal data stores and the potential of that being compromised, even though we know it's a bit more tamper proof, are people afraid that it's risky?
Yeah, this is definitely a special topic that Saarah has dug into a lot. So I'll leave Saarah to handle this one.
Thanks, Naser. So the risk perception of this is really interesting because essentially what you would have with a personal data store is a honeypot of all that customer data in one place. But of course, we know it's actually more secure because you're not depending on a business to store that customer data for you, right? So in traditional systems, businesses have a large amounts of information on us, and they store it in a very centralized place. And the tourism industry in particular, there are smaller providers that exist as well who don't necessarily have the dedicated IT infrastructure to handle things such as data leaks and data breaches, right? So I want to take this a bit more technically and try to break down how in traditional systems data is encrypted and then how that is actually more secure in a decentralized identity ecosystem. So there's a few different concepts I'll be exploring here, but I'll break them down. So data is encrypted using something called data encryption keys. So this can be done quite granularly, and then you have a master key, which adds another layer of security by encrypting all the other keys, and then you can store these into different places. So in this case of traditional systems, hackers have to gain access to two things here. So you can mitigate this through a concept called key rotation. So this is a scheduled rotation, which involves decrypting data with an old key and encrypting it with a new one. So you can do this whenever a key has been compromised and then to prevent further access. But let me use an analogy to kind of explain this. So imagine there's a large mansion where all people's belongings are stored in different rooms. So in each of these individual rooms, say it represents individual data. So there are multiple rooms in this mansion, and the mansion has a single key that can open the front door. So this is what I would refer to as the master key. And inside, there are smaller keys for each room. These are the data encryption keys, where all the individual customer data has been stored. If the burglar breaks into the mansion with a master key, they can access all the belongings from all the different rooms, even if they've been individually locked, because the master key is a single point of failure. So this is the traditional system. So in a self-sovereign identity system, how is this different, right? So each user has their own key pair. And this is important because it reduces the risk of large-scale data breaches because there's going to be no single point of failure, which I'll explain in a second. So the data is encrypted with a unique private key. So if an attacker wants to access the data, they will need to individually compromise each person's user private key to access everyone's data, right? So to bring this back to the analogy, so we used a mansion to describe the idea of master key and the data encryption keys. But here we can think of the personal data store and the self-sovereign identity ecosystem as more like a neighborhood of individual houses. So each individual stores their belongings in their own house.
Yeah, it's being able, because it's so new, I think it's just there's no consideration for just how secure it is. And, I think the general public, including myself, I say this every time, there's more and more marketing to watch out for hackers and scammers. And so I think everyone's already on high alert that the idea of something new, they're like, oh no, I don't want to give up all my data, but actually this is the way forward. It's much more secure. And when we're talking about this and when we're unpacking all this new way of handling and sharing data, it seems like a no-brainer. I think some of the foreshadowed challenges is how to make all this data management and data handling work together and cohesively.
No, this is a really interesting question. So I've been having a lot of conversations and a lot of research to kind of formulate my answers to this. It's a lot of open questions when it comes to what does the future of personal data stores look like, right? And how are we positioning this commercially? Like, what is the model? Like how you're saying, how is all this data going to work together cohesively? Like who's maintaining it? What's going to happen if there's multiple personal data stores in numerous different ecosystems, right? So as Publicis Sapient, driving this with Condatas, we need to position the right message and have clarity on where we stand with this and understand we're also part of how this is unfolding. We're not just participants and implementers. We're also thinkers in this space. So going to speak to stakeholders, we need to understand the value of this and also where it's going as well. So when it comes to the implementation, adoption of a personal data store isn't going to be a walk in the park. So we're taking away the notion of owning a customer and their data and moving towards a consent to share paradigm, which it just hasn't been accepted yet. So in terms of development and adoption, this isn't going to happen overnight, especially if we want a personal data store which is rich with information and very valuable for the user to take with them and use every time they interact with a new digital service. It's going to have to be an incremental progress on this. Users will gradually add data to their personal data store when they interact with a service provider and over time. So they won't just be filling out a bunch of forms, because that would be a really bad user experience for the visitor. But for example, whenever I'm doing a booking, I'm asked certain information about my preferences, my likes and dislikes. Instead of that just sitting with one service provider, I instead incrementally add this to my personal data store until it becomes something where I can just enter once and reuse many times across this ecosystem. And one way to actually potentially do this is integration with social media. So how
Yeah, it's like your For You page. It knows that
yeah.
I really love seeing like dogs doing silly things. So they know I like animals. Pet friendly hotel.
Yeah, and like, look, other than obvious things like having standardized protocols, frameworks, things like the W3C's decentralized identifiers and the likes. There are things worth mentioning that are happening. So, for example, there's a great effort underway now from the Decentralized Identity Foundation, the Hospitality and Travel Special Interest Group. So they're working on a standardized travel and hospitality schemas, right? So this kind of thing will encourage interoperability and familiarity around the world as this space starts to evolve. And the decentralized community in general is quite vibrant, and it's really, there's a lot of movement and a lot of collaboration going on, and this is really key to work towards these open protocols, open source, and ultimately interoperability. I mean, that's really, I think a lot of people are focused on this now, and it's super important to design and build in a way that is flexible, adaptable, and easy to integrate with, where, for example, travel providers of all shapes and sizes and all kinds of complexities can easily join this decentralized ecosystem, and to have it, the benefit of being able to join easily and to get significant benefit out of it also easily.
That's definitely a standout. It's the how do we make this all fit together? And interoperability is like a buzzword. And what will happen when there's multiple personal data stores?
That's a really interesting question, Lucy. So the way that I've kind of envisioned this is we'll go through different phases of this development of this personal data store. So I'm thinking we'll go through like a transitionary period. We'll see multiple data stores, and then there'll be this kind of convergence of using the common standards, and then it's going to come the stage where we're looking at what those commercial models will kind of look like. But let me just break down these phases. So me and Naser, we're currently working a production grade implementation of a personal data store. So because this is emerging technology and we're in this transitionary period, we're going to see multiple data stores being created in siloed ecosystems. So this development, it will happen organically, it'll be incremental, and we'll see all these hotspots of development. We might see personal data stores created in many different regions. So whether that's in Europe, the Middle East, America, there might be siloed destination personal data stores or for tourism cities. And we need to kind of conceptually start bringing together a point of view on how all of this will work. So as Naser was saying, the good thing is the technology itself is sound. So if there are multiple manifestations of data stores, as long as the data access protocols are the same, which they should be if it's orchestrated by this Decentralized Identity Foundation and they're followed, then it should be okay. As long as all these personal data stores are following open standards, we can bring them together and create a common data storage regardless of the ecosystem the customer interacts with. So eventually, what we're kind of envisioning is they should all coexist.
That's, I think, is my next question. Is organizations is always focused on money. So commercially, what does that look like? Who's going to pay?
There's a lot of different opinions in this space because it's very emerging. We're still very much in this early point where we're kind of forming opinions and trying to take a stance of envisioning what this will look like in the future. My personal standpoint, and this is like in the initial stage, we're seeing these hotspots of development, and if it makes sense, if a region or a tourism city or destination that is benefiting from the personal data store is paying for that initially. But when it comes to a point of maturity, and we need to come up with a commercial model which justifies, as you say, the maintenance of it. So, for example, let's think of a good destination experience. Say Las Vegas, right? Say they built a personal data store to help boost tourism and create these hyper personalized destination experiences. With a personal data store, it would be beneficial for the destination because visitors can easily share preferences with all service providers in that destination. Every restaurant, every hotel, every activity, it makes their experience truly seamless. So Vegas as a destination will benefit because all the businesses who are there can provide an elevated experience. Then they then outcompete similar destinations, which means more visitors and higher return on investment, right? But then it's a question of what if the visitor wants to use that personal data store, which is being maintained by Vegas in another destination? Why would Vegas continue to pay for it? So this is the fundamental problem which arises here, and it kind of brings back to your question of what is the commercial model after this point, transitionary phase, when it comes to this point of maturity. So I think like if it was like a destination like Vegas, they would then offer it as a service to other regions, other destinations, and businesses who want their hands on that data because it's high quality data, right? It's compared to what we have now, which is low quality, incomplete, outdated. What you have in the personal data store is something you can truly use for these hyper personalized experiences. So who pays? So the way I'm seeing this, the first cost will be on the regions and destinations or whoever is initially creating these personal data stores in this transitionary stage. So we're going to have multiple ones. And then once it reaches this level of maturity, they then sell it to other places. So a question might be, why won't these destinations create one themselves? A lot of governments, they spend a lot to entice tourism, especially for destinations which are emerging, right? I'm sure we can all think of holiday destinations which are up and coming, which we know that our friends are going to. Like, for example, in my research, I'm seeing Albania and Cuba, which are emerging destinations. But what these places lack is having that tourism infrastructure to make it seamless. So hypothetically, if Vegas had a personal data store and you could partner with these places and grant access to that personal data store, that's the second stream of revenue for them. So the first is when they boost tourism to that destination, and the second is when they then sell it to other destinations. So that's kind of what my view on it is. And then eventually they can sell it to the businesses within that destination once it reaches this level of maturity and everyone's like, oh, I need this access to this high quality data to provide this high quality service. So that's kind of the view that I've taken from the visitor perspective. But then what does it mean for residents? I think that's slightly different. I wanted to bring in the example of like Google Cloud, right? Like I never personally used to pay for Google Cloud because I didn't see the value of storing that data. But now I'm seeing, oh, it stores all of my photos from years ago. Why would I have just my photos on one device when I can have it on the cloud?
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. We could talk for ages, but I will get to the final question, which is never easy. In this case, off the back of everything we've chatted about, when it comes to decentralized identity, what are, in your opinions, the top myths that need to be busted?
Yeah, top myths. That's okay. Um, Yeah, well, look, I mean, I've heard this said before. I think when you first start to talk about it, that it's too complicated, right? Or it's a lot for someone to have to manage their own data. So it can sound like it's burdensome in some way. But I think like you don't need to have a technical know-how. I think that's couldn't be further from the truth, right? Like if you look at, for example, now the rise of Gen AI, right? Everybody's using it now, and it's quite easy to use, right? But that doesn't mean that everyone knows how large language models work. So everything really comes down to user-friendly and intuitive designs, and everything, all the complexity of it comes in the background, right? It just happens. And that's, people might listen to this conversation, they'll hear a lot of like buzzwords and a lot of, different kind of technology terms and all of that. But really, it all comes down to just like any evolving technology. The layperson now does a lot of things on their phones and their devices, lots of activities, interactions, and even these micro gestures. I mean, when the iPhone removed the button at the bottom and they made it into a swipe up. I mean, these things like it can be a bit alien to you in the beginning, but it's like now you don't even think about it, right? And that's
Yeah.
the case with all kinds of intuitive designs. When you open a new app, you don't have to think, you kind of know where it's going. So that's our job, to make that easy for the user. And yeah, and I mean, everyone also stores important documents and things like that in a safe or in a wallet or in a purse, or even, as Saarah was talking about, the cloud storage, right? Like people are now familiar with that. They see the advantage of it. So this will be just as easy, right? If people are familiar with these kind of concepts, then I think managing data and all of that, it goes hand in hand with security and privacy and protection. That's one myth. Another one is that it's, I guess, kind of goes hand in hand with it, but it's only useful for digital only interactions. So it can be easy to assume from a user's perspective that, when they think about decentralized or digital identity, is that it's restricted to remote interactions with an app or with a web platform. Um, because since a large part of, from their perspective, is around the verified credentials, profiles and preferences data, and so on, stored in a digital wallet. But I think we're already seeing this manifest in the physical realm, where there's use cases that are there already, but will continue to rise. And we're certainly definitely tapping into this territory, right? So with things like boarding passes in airports, hotel room check-ins and things like that, and lots of forms of physical access control. So I think that's maybe perhaps a myth to be busted. And then last thing is that it's just another gimmick, right? And it will fade away. So this one, I think, is I certainly don't think so, and I think I speak on behalf of Saarah. It absolutely is not, right? It's gaining a lot of traction now with businesses, with governments, and take IDaaS for example, right? Now it looks like it's becoming more and more mainstream, and in the coming years, I think we're going to hear a lot about it, and then people will start to have it in their hands. On a much bigger scale. So we're constantly moving towards a digital society today, and having an identity layer there, it's just, and a user-centric one for that matter, is really, really foundational. It's just a no-brainer, to use your words, Lucy, earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this is the future.
I think they're good. I think it feels like the logical next step. So I appreciate you sharing those with me. But thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today about digital transformation and the work that Publicis Sapient and you guys are doing. As always, if anyone has any questions for Saarah or Naser, please do reach out via LinkedIn or visit publicissapient.com. We hope you enjoyed listening in today, and stay tuned for more exciting discussions as we verify this.